All right, welcome to anybody and all who are listening to this recording right now. I am sitting with Sir Roger of Joseph Manning Jr. Has anybody ever called you that before, Roger, actually?
No, but I'm reminded that we were just watching the Game of Thrones episode of South Park, which
Yeah.
moves back into Colorado, of course.
Well, I will refrain from Sir Rogers from here on out. Hey, it's so great to see you again. It's been a couple years since we were able
Yes, you too, Bruce.
here in Colorado at Red Rocks, a fantastic place there. Actually, we should talk about that at some point. Some of your favorite places that you've played over the years. But we'll probably jump around a bit here with this interview. I'm trying to make this informative and enlightening for musicians. As well as just the plain old music geek like myself. I am not a musician. My gift is working with musicians over the last almost 30 years in various capacities in the music industry. What I want to do here is just give Roger the floor to just talk and expand on whatever you want to talk about. But really what I would like to do is to begin because you got a flurry of activity yet again. It's quite amazing. You were relatively quiet there for a long period of time. And then sometime, I don't know, what was it, about 2005 or so, all of a sudden you throttled up. Kind of parallel to sort of starting to work with, as you were settling into the Beck world a little bit, possibly. But there's a lot of projects that are going on right now. And I'd like to sort of talk about those. First off, I would like to discuss the latest reissues of your solo work that's going on and who you're working with, how that relationship came about, and a little bit about the remastering process with how that worked to make these records sound even better. I guess there was a gap for you with where they were and where they now are presently. But if you could talk a little bit about how that worked and what it was like translating the original digital recordings as faithfully as possible. And were there any kind of like sonic changes that you felt were necessary with this process?
Well, if I've got all my information correct, there has been no remastering process other than the fact that we've added some bonus material and compiled. See, all my solo records initially came out in Japan first, and then there were.
I remember well.
The first one was re-released in the United States because I was signed up to Warner Brothers digital label called Cordless, which is a short-lived Jack Holtzman internet venture, blah blah blah. But so there's a different version of my first solo album.
Is that Solid State Warrior?
Yeah, Solid State Warrior is the Japanese one. Land of Pure Imagination is the American one, or every territory but Japan. And then it was all, now all we've done is coalesced everything. Got it in one place, reprinted everything up to include the bonus tracks, the material that was left off before. So it's all in one easy to reach location for fans, making it super easy. It's finally up on the DSPs after all this time. Well, it was just a bunch of red tape that prevented us from doing that. And that would include my pledge only EP from 2018, Glamping. So all this is available now. Anything I've done solo-wise is available now, except for my Malibu instrumental project, which will be coming out later.
So I'm curious if, as you sort of re-explore past projects like this, even though they're relatively recent, in the last 10 plus years or so, when you go back and sort of re-engage with these kinds of projects, do you get a chance to sort of like revisit some of the experiences that you went through inside the recording process or just the midwifing of it? And I'd be curious, like lessons learned that you had inside of recording each of the projects in terms of your own artistic growth.
Well, yeah, absolutely. There's always something to learn. There's always hindsight is 2020. Would have, should have, could have. But
feel free to talk about some of those things. Those are always kind of interesting to explore with with artists, because there's always the perception of you as being a perfectionist. But from what I know, you're kind of like an in the moment kind of guy with what feels good is right.
Yeah, well, I put it through, all my filters, and it's got to reach my standard. But that's, of course, whatever my standard is at whatever age, based on the information I know or don't know. So, I mean, with the Jellyfish stuff, our philosophy was we had better make sure we were 100% happy and pleased with everything we were putting out for ourselves and our bandmates as a collective. We couldn't be bothered by ultimately what our girlfriends thought, what the record company thought, or what the production team thought. All these people's opinion we respected and highly valued. But at the end of the day, we're the ones that have to fall asleep with this and all the positive and negative results that are going to come from it. And so, I mean, that's why, things were sometimes uptight in the studio, and we were awfully serious and maybe didn't have as many laughs or was lighthearted as maybe some other recording famous album stories go, because we're just hyper focused in making sure our vision in our heads was being realized to the best of our abilities, again, as music makers at our age.
Well, certainly Jellyfish, I think, achieved that at an extremely high level. And the fascinating things inside the mythology and the legend of the band, I think that really was transmitted to all levels of a listener, whether it was a musician, someone who worked in the business of music, and just the everyday fan, or someone hearing it on the radio. There was something very unique about both those records, and certainly Spilt Milk, sonically at a higher level, that just screamed exactly what you said and accomplish, and just a high level commitment to professionalism, to the craft of making something that was going to be something that you guys were certainly not going to look back and say, I kind of wish I did.
Well, there's always going to be some of that, because you evolve and mature and you learn more and more as you grow in learning to make records. But yeah, the whole point was, it really doesn't matter what Rolling Stone says, or the stranger at the show, or this critic in this magazine. Ultimately, because you're like, no, I stand by it. This works for me. I achieved my personal goal in contributing to this project. And whether you saw it going up on the radio charts or it's like, yeah, of course, all that stuff, you want to see it have the best life. You want your kids to graduate from college, so to speak, and then the financial perks that can come from that. But your feelings are going to be easily bruised if you don't 100% believe in your art that you're putting out there. So that's what I've always done. I've never released anything out into the world that I didn't have 100% conviction about. And of course, as time passes, you go, oh, well, that, come to think of it, would have been cool to try this instead, or shouldn't have done it that way.
So
but
you don't, that doesn't happen for you.
It does. Just,
oh, it does.
Absolutely. But fortunately, there's nothing that I look back on, even with the Jellyfish records, and go, oh God, what were we thinking? I mean, there's nothing, that I'll never live that down, kind of thing. No, yeah. that hasn't happened, and I think it's because of my persistence and quality control when I'm involved with something.
So objectively observing your own creative life inside the solo work of the last almost 15 years, I guess we're in right now in this active period. Have you noticed any sort of kind of evolutions and transformations in your own sort of approach to songwriting and production of your work?
From the get-go, I was never as fascinated by capturing sound. Ultimately, the role of the engineer. Ultimately, that's a whole world in and of itself. And thankfully, Jellyfish had the genius of Jack Joseph Puig, for our very first records. And Albie who was co-producing those albums with us and overseeing and bringing so much wisdom. So we had this incredible team who had our backs. I've worked with other musicians who've absolutely gotten into the minutia of the recording process and what all the outboard gear does. And while I'm fascinated by that, while I appreciate what it does, and while I certainly can hear the difference, ultimately I'm not fascinated by it. I leave that in the hands of somebody else. Unfortunately, I've had a lot of good mixers who kind of take my pile of recording scraps and we massage them into something that I, think has had not only quality, but has a lot of character that's unique to my solo process.
So has each of your albums or EP projects had a different mixer involved, or are you just usually settled into one person for the particular project in that time?
Well, I've used John Paterno for all the solo material that's out thus far.
Okay.
And the Licorice Quartet stuff, we're using a gentleman named Ken Sluter, who happened to track the drums. And then Frankie Siragusa also tracked a lot of the Licorice Quartet stuff. So, you just run into like minds over the years. And, Brad Jones did the Imperial Drag album.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Brad, actually, speaking of, I don't know if you can see this, I got a, one of my bands on Not Lame that I did. Boy, how many projects did we do together? I think we did five releases. Brad Jones worked on all of them. And he was just a brilliant producer collaborator, like you were talking about.
He's a great musician. He's a great songwriter. He is
unbelievable,
the real deal in all respects.
Yeah, just the empathy he has for the musician and adapting to their unique creative process. He intuits that so well.
Yeah.
And it was just a great honor to have his talents on those records with the Shazam. And you could hear what he brought to the Imperial Drag record. He sort of comes from the same place we do in terms of our upbringing inside of pantheistic embracement of all types of music. He brings that and brings this commercial sheen without being glossy, and still filled with soulful warmth.
Yep. He was a happy accident. We were scheduled to make the record with John Leckie. And
God, one of my favorite producers of all time.
Well,
I want to talk about John Leckie.
I don't have much to say other than I got on the phone with him and we had a positive conversation. We were going to continue that conversation because we were interested in pursuing it further. And then he went radio silent. I don't know for a fact what happened, but let's just say the next record that came out from him was the successful Verve album. So he may have gotten the call to go do that and said, see ya, which is fine. That's going to happen. Yeah. And I didn't want to wait around to audition 20 other people. Yeah. And Eric had come across Brad from a Jill Sobule record that Brad Jones had worked on.
Yeah, and that's kind of early in his production career, relatively speaking.
And Eric played it for me. I forget what Eric's connection was. He had met Brad briefly or something. I don't remember. But I knew nothing about him. I listened to the record and was like, this sounds amazing. Get this guy out to LA. Let's talk to him.
Really?
If he's into it, let's see how fast he can get in the studio. Because I'd already been waiting around because Eric had detoured temporarily to work with Slash's Snake Pit.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I remember that.
He toured and recorded with him, which was fantastic, but that went on way too long. So all this time's going by, and I'm like, I don't want to lose the Jellyfish fans that we had, in 93, 94. They're not going to wait around forever. I wanted to get a new album out, and that they would hopefully be into. It was very different music, but, I didn't want that time lag to.
Yeah, that would have been that's interesting. Those would have been two very different records, being very familiar with Leckie's work and also Brad's too. But would have worked, I think, wonderfully.
Sure.
I think the instincts there would be somewhat different. I mean, he's worked. I know you're a huge fan, as I am, of XTC and in his work with that band.
Oh yeah, I mean, he's a mega talent. He's done such a wide variety of artists, and it all sounds good. It all gave us some great records.
Yeah, I've been revisiting the buying the latest reissues of Bebop Deluxe. They got these massive premium box sets with DVDs and 4 CDs and massive. So I'm revisiting that, and I'm listening to it with a new ear. And I hear every time I listen to those records, and so many of these great producers like Lecky or Jack Douglas, you hear new things that you enjoy that you miss, and you always and he has an engineer's ear as well. Like Jack Douglas always had Jay Messina. Those two had a chemistry that was really unique. So producers like that really bring just a huge potential to make a project truly legendary and special.
Yeah, those Aerosmith records are highly influential. I worship Jay Messina's sound, and if you're not familiar with it, Warren Hewart's YouTube series Produced Like a Pro, he has a lot of those people on who are
I've seen, I do follow it, even though I'm not a musician. I just find it really fascinating because he's the rapport that he builds with the musicians when you sit down like this and you guys speak the same language, and he knows everybody. But like Jack Douglas is one of the most like at the top of my list of people that I would want to meet with and spend, literally, is Jack Douglas. He is so freaking cool. It has so many stories. If you get a chance to dig in and look at and just hear his story, his backstory, absolutely fascinating. But his sense of what an artist at that point in their time in their career needed, and the discipline and the boundaries to put on them was just so instinctive. And Jay Messina, I mean, the sound, I mean, Rocks is arguably the best sounding record of the 70s because of Jay Messina.
And it's one of the best rock albums of the 70s.
Yeah.
I mean, the songwriting on that album is top to bottom. It's the best. It's like a solid AC/DC record or Cheap Trick record or Zeppelin record. It's just like bam, 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 bam.
Yeah, it was real special. So is there anything else now? You have vinyl releases, circling back to the solo part of the conversation here. The vinyl releases are coming out. We're recording this in mid-late August right now of 2020. And the vinyl releases, to my understanding, are coming up here in October.
Correct.
Is there any kind of special treatment or any interesting?
Well, yeah, I mean, great care was taken to get those happening, and by the sheer fact that all the originals were never pressed up on vinyl, so these are first times for people.
Yeah. Well, and there's certainly a thirst for that right now. Thanks to the heavens that you have. We all us older sort of music geeks have this conversation often, where we give thanks for the warm embracement of younger generations that recognize that vinyl is actually, has a superior component to it that is different than the digital world.
I mean, yeah, it's been the whole DJ culture, or I guess the DJ culture of the 90s and 2000s. I mean, not only did they remind all of us and shout the praises of the sonic quality and pleasure of listening to vinyl recordings, but they turned on so many factions onto music.
That'd be an interesting book for somebody to explore, because there were so many people in that culture, subculture, that their influence really reverberated and echoed in so many different ways, and culturally, not just musically as well. I'd never really thought of it like that. That's fascinating. So I'm going to give you a chance to pitch here. So with all this activity going on, you're going to have new people that are going to hear the music, but give us a reason why somebody who had bought the CDs before need to buy these reissues now. Go ahead. Sell me.
Aside from the bonus content, previously unreleased. I mean,
We'll talk about the bonus content.
Sure.
That's the hook, baby.
We have 3 live versions of songs.
Oh, okay.
From different albums.
Okay.
So, Operator from the Glamping EP. What You Don't Know About the Girl from originally only from Solid State Warrior, but now you can have it on the reissue. So that's live. And then Creeple People from Land of Pure Imagination. So these are all live. I've played a handful of shows in recent years, and we fortunately recorded them. And so Chris Price, one of my collaborators on Glamping, he was kind enough to mix these, and he really did a good job because it was a mess up there on stage.
Was it really?
Well, you're in a tiny bar, and I've got 6 people up there trying to recreate my record, and everybody did their best, but there's everything's bleeding into everything else. It's hard to, make it as enjoyable as possible, and he did a really good job, and that's exciting, particularly because I've only performed this music in Japan, and there.
I didn't know that, really.
Oh yeah,
So you did.
I did a handful of things in LA, and they were like one-offs. I played International Pop Overthrow in 2006, one show.
Right.
Remember
that.
I did a Grammy Museum short little show in 2018, and then a full show at a club again for International Pop Overthrow. So, but in Japan, I did proper club tours. I played Fuji Fest. It was a whole different situation in Japan. Most of that was recorded and filmed, and I'm putting some DVDs together, so that'll be fun. But as far as
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear that, because I remember you talking about, I don't think it was the last time I saw you, probably the time before that, but you were talking about the TVI's had some footage that you were going to be putting into DVD
Correct.
eventually, whenever it made sense.
Yeah. So that's the big deal. And then, like I said, there's a lot of, there's 3 unheard tracks from Solid State Warrior that are now available, and on vinyl everything's on vinyl for the first time. So that's
excellent.
Cool. Yeah.
Well done.
Thank you.
You're just a regular salesman, Roger.
No.
Look at you go.
My dad's a realtor.
Actually, now you brought up something I did want to touch on, which is live performance a bit. Now, obviously, the live shows of you as a solo artist are few and far between. Is there a reason why you just don't, is it just too much work getting a band together, practiced and rehearsed well enough to get out there and do the material justice, or you're too busy, and then are you planning on possibly, when things open up, obviously more here in 2021 and beyond, doing some more solo shows open to that?
Well, I'm always open to live performances, both with Licorice Quartet and solo. But you're absolutely right. It's been more about logistics. I would rather perform my stuff with musicians, so I can help recreate a lot of the detail of the arrangements, as well as the juicy harmonies I love doing on records. So could I perform by myself with a piano in somebody's living room? Yeah, but I'd be very self-conscious. That gets really old real quick. I've always said there's nothing more boring than watching a keyboard player.
Have you done any living room? Have you done a living room show?
No, not by myself. I don't even know if I've done any official living room shows, but
I have to ask the obvious question, because I've God, I guess I've sort of known you, so to speak, here for almost 20 years, going back, starting working on the Jellyfish fan club box set. I think the work on that began around 2000, if I recall correctly. I always get asked all these questions still, just like you, believe it or not. I get hit up with Jellyfish questions often. And I can't let that what you're just talking about going by, because if some wealthy Jellyfish fan says, Roger, I want you to do a living room show, somebody's going to ask me this, seriously. Would you be open to doing it?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I was, Willie Wisely by any chance?
Yes, absolutely. I did, Not Lame did a record with him too.
Right. So he's not only a good friend, but such a great supporter of my work, and been a fantastic advisor.
Yeah, there's some great, for fans listening to this video right now, you should do a search, put Roger's name in an interview. You'll get a whole bunch of fascinating interviews, including the Produce Like a Pro interview, which is spectacular, by the way. I think it might be one of your best interviews that's out there. But there's some really fun stuff that you and Willie did.
Yeah, that was back in
when
08,
you
I
were
think.
starting to work with Oglio, I believe.
Correct. That was a wonderful experience, but that led to, I mean, Willie set up a whole kind of mini US living room tour. And I had to stop that in its tracks due to some personal health challenges at the time. And then when I was feeling better, we never resumed it. So I'm always open to anything, because one of the biggest challenge is logistics. I mean, it's why didn't Steely Dan tour for the bulk of their heyday? They were holed up in the studio as songwriters, and recreating a Steely Dan song, as we now know from their modern recent touring, is a whole huge undertaking. And it's got 12 people on stage just to make it sound, well, that kind of sounds like the album version I know. So I have some incredible people that have done me huge favors with their time and energy and are very talented. But it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
And other than that glorious 2 hours on stage, which is gratifying for everybody, including me, it's just like, sometimes it's not particularly sustainable. I mean, frankly, I'd rather be in the studio finishing one of my songs that the public hasn't heard yet, which is also going to take a whole lot of time, and focusing on that. What I'm trying to do now, since 2018, is set up an environment where the public doesn't have to wait so long for new material. I mean, I have enough unfinished material until, whenever I'm supposed to graduate from this planet. It's literally having the time to put it all together and to record it in a fun and interesting way.
I'm curious, are you and Jason, as in Faulkner, for somebody that doesn't know who I'm referring to, Jason in this context, are you and Jason similar in that regard? Because I know Jason has hundreds of songs too, and people always like, why hasn't he recorded anything and released anything? And is it a similar situation for him, where it just it's problematic just finding the right people to play and getting it into the state where you want to bring it into the world? Well,
I mean, speaking for myself, most of these solo albums have been entirely, they were solo. That was my intention. I wanted to try to put everything together myself, for better, for worse. Jason's always been a one-man show. So I'm pretty sure he's actually working on some new solo material as we speak, certainly during lockdown here. I think that's one of the things he's been up to. But for me, it always comes down to time. And, thankfully, I can wear a lot of hats, and I enjoy freelancing, and I do lots of different things in the music business. Writing and recording original music and performing it is one of the things I do. I mean, that's certainly how I started in the business, with collaborating with my bandmates in Jellyfish. Those were group efforts, but it's that constant juggling act for any artist, whether music's their medium, or painting, or they're a writer, or what have you. It's how do I have my cake and eat it too? How do I stay creatively fulfilled? Say what I want to say, my unique contribution to the volumes and volumes and volumes of music that's out there, and at the same time, getting our bills paid like anybody else. So
yeah, well, I don't mean to be. I don't want to do sort of a crass transition with this, because I did want to talk about this, because I become actually very interested. Still, kind of, have my toes in the music business still. And a lot of musicians still send me material, and I about, I don't know, what was it, about 5 years ago, your name started popping up a lot, with production credits and also performing on records, and that kind of sort of seemed to sort of arrive and then be very voluminous. I mean, lots of activity was going on there. I wanted you to sort of talk about some of the artists that you've worked with, and just give you kind of a platform to talk about some of those projects. And I've been recently asked by a couple different people, and I didn't know quite what the answer was, and I figured I would just eventually ask you, so I will now. You know, artists that are fans of your work, how do they go about connecting with you to produce their records or play on them or co-write, even for that matter?
Well, that should be very easy, and I hope that.
Well, let's do it.
Yeah, exactly. I hope I haven't missed any golden opportunities because someone hasn't been able to reach me. So right now, through Licorice Quartet, one of the fan engagement incentives we're offering is to perform or sing on other people's albums or projects. We will co-write with people.
Wow, all three of you?
Or if they just want to write with Eric Dover.
Yeah.
Yeah, or all three of us. When we've had both. We've had people do both. We've had people who've hired us for all three of us to play on the recording. Other people who just wanted Tim to play some bass or sing, or saying we all do that. And I certainly started doing that with the Glamping EP. The other way is to reach me through my arranging website. So it's rogerarranging.com. And you can hit me up for any project there. Of course, I do arranging too. So if you have a finished song, but you want a string quartet arrangement to accompany it, depending on your budget, we can get real players and all that stuff, or we can construct it with synthesizers and samples. And, again, I've had people do it all kinds of ways. And those things are always fun. I always learn something, and it just keeps me active. But there's really, and that includes productions. So yeah, sky's the limit with that stuff.
Awesome. And then what about some of the artists over the last couple of years that you've worked with?
I got to produce a brilliant Taiwanese singer. I mean, she was raised in America as well. Her name is Joanna Wang, and she's had a pretty successful career on Sony Taiwan and in Southeast Asia. Since 2008, so for a while now. And I've written and recorded with her and produced one of her albums. But really, I've mostly been put to use as an arranger, keyboardist, singer on people's records. And quite a few artists at this point. It's been absolutely incredible, from Cheap Trick to Morrissey to Beck, and a whole bunch of others. Brandon Flowers and Adele. It's just been all over the map.
Are these usually projects where you're exchanging files? And if not, with some of those artists that you named, are you traveling and going to England to record with Adele, for example, or to work on whatever song you're working on, or with Beck, you're obviously probably doing that in L. Do you guys record in LA usually?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's all of the above. So, and it's always different, and there's never any rhyme or reason to it. I mostly work in person, but obviously recently it's been almost all file sharing. I just played on this amazing album by a Latin artist who I've worked with on and off. His name is Juanes, and he's
how do you spell that for people that want to sort of look into that?
Jaunes. Okay. And he's gigantic.
Really?
But of course,
it's always that way when we hear conversations like this, and you hear about these artists. They're really massive wherever they are in another part of the world. But
and he has a beautiful voice. He's such a consummate musician and pays attention to all kinds of detail in a way that a lot of new up and comers don't. And his music sounds nothing like the Beatles, but he speaks that vocabulary and appreciates all that stuff and looks for those same type of ingredients in his music. And so I played half on his record in person before quarantine, and the other half I've played just out of this room. The producer, Sebastian Kreis, has sent me files and so forth. And I like both. I like being in the room with the energy, the people vibing off each other, influencing each other. And then I also like having it totally quiet in my room, you know, nobody looking over my shoulder. And I just kind of get in this meditative place and start channeling ideas. And you get clarity really quick, what's working, what's not, what to spend your time on. So I love all that. And my ego likes being sought out to, it's just so damn flattering that often even strangers think enough of my work, enough of my personality, my musical personality, to want to have me, invite me to decorate on their music. And that's, I can get really worked up about that. I take it very personally. Suddenly it's like, man, I am not going to let you down. So, you know, one song may take me 2-3 hours to sculpt. Another single song may take me 3 days because I'm just trying to figure out that jigsaw puzzle. But that's the part that I like, the puzzle part. And I just like the record making process. I love the artist. I work a lot with Joe Ciccarelli, and he works a lot with singer-songwriter men and women.
Yeah, he sure does. And another fantastic set of ears.
Yeah, I mean,
the body of work that he continues to build upon.
Yeah, what a, you know, college course he's been working with him over the years.
Yeah.
But it's not uncommon we'll just start with the rhythm section, and the artist sits there and plays us the song on acoustic guitar and sings it to us. We're writing down the chords. Here's the lyrics, and the four of us have to go into the main room, and, you know, on the spot try to concoct some kind of interesting rhythm arrangement. And we all put our heads together, try this, try that, but you're still working fairly fast. And Joe's guiding us and kind of conducting, and the captain of the ship. But that process of taking the raw song, realizing it, expanding upon it, to ideally get what the artist's vision is. And sometimes they're new to the business. In other words, new to the process. They may have a sentiment in their lyric and their song, but they're not aware of all the places the instruments and a quality arrangement can take it. I mean, it can literally make or break a song. We've all heard billions of Beatles covers. You know, we've all. My former mate, she used to joke. People say, "Are you a Bob Dylan fan?" She goes, "Only when people cover his songs." You know, and because she couldn't get past his essence of just him and his acoustic guitar, but, you know, she absolutely appreciated the brilliance of those tunes when they were fleshed out in a more kind of three-dimensional, electric, you know, 70s rock, 60s psych pop kind of way. And so I've always been fascinated by being part of that process, and just am so thankful I get to have that as part of what I do.
So for musicians or bands that are listening right now, whether you're young, old, or maybe you're an established musician that's in a creative cul-de-sac kind of area, I encourage you to sort of rewind the last 3 minutes of this conversation, because what Roger just talked about there encapsulated, I think, an important part of the creative side of the producing process. And it makes me want to be a musician, Roger, listening to you talk like that, because I mean, that's the kind of commitment to the craft that I'm not going to say few people have, but people get caught up in just sort of the obligation of the work sometimes, rather than just the pure enjoyment of that. So if I had a band, I'd be saving up my shekels to bring you on for sure. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. That was really, really interesting, even for a non-musician like me to hear. But that's the kind of thing with the bands that I worked with on Not Lame Recordings for so many years. That was the kind of environment that I wanted to create for them. Like for a band like the Shazam, working with Brad Jones, those records were very expensive to make for a little indie label, but they were worth every dollar to have that kind of committed, empathetic connective producer to midwife and bring that into the world, because it brought out the best in everybody, the musicians with the producer and the producer with the musicians.
Yeah.
And that's kind of an art that I'm afraid some of the younger musicians make in the world, in our digital world, which is fantastic and so empowering, and open up so many avenues of access that didn't exist before. Nonetheless, they're trade-offs, right? And they should be, I think musicians need to be aware of those trade-offs when they go into some of those detours or turns down established roads, and look at the possibilities of approaching it a different way, like you're talking about.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
That's my soapbox there. But so let's shift and talk about the Licorice Quartet. I remember when you announced the project's name finally, after hearing about you talking about it over the years. And the gestation period was relatively short, so to speak, I think for you guys. Once you started working on it in earnest, I think sometime in early 2018 or so, wasn't it?
2017, actually.
Was it 2017? But you finished it up, and you've got 4 songs out right now, correct?
Correct.
But you recorded a lot more than that.
Well, we've recorded 12, and the other 8 are, all near completion, but they have detailing, and of course they need to be mixed. I'm doing that for EP number 2 right now. Another
Fantastic.
4 songs.
You preempted my question, but you knew I was going to ask you that anyway, because most people listening would put something in the comments on YouTube saying, "Why the hell did he ask him when that's coming out?" So is that something in early 2021 kind of date?
Probably. It's
Okay.
hard to say how the rest of the year is going to unfold, but that makes sense.
So talk a little bit about, for those that aren't aware of the components of the band, and how you guys crossed paths and decided to work on this project together a bit.
Yeah, well, right after Jellyfish disbanded, because Eric and Tim, of course, were in the touring final incarnation of that group. Tim had recorded with us on Spilt Milk. I went right into working with Eric Dover, but in the meantime, Eric and I had contributed a little bit to the Jets album that Tim Smith had done with his old pal Rob Aldrich, which again is something for folks to look up if they're not familiar with it, because it's just more incredible, pop sing-along songwriting.
Yeah, man, what a great record. In the early years of Not Lame, I carried that record on the distribution arm of the company. And we sold hundreds of copies of that record, rightfully so, because it really is an outstanding record. Yeah.
So Tim, both Eric and I got to be involved with that to whatever degree, and those were, fun memories. Anyway, I think I was listening to that album again right after the new year in 2017, and it just dawned on me. I was like, this is a crime that Tim Smith and I have not written and recorded together, because ideally, whatever the fantastical third Jellyfish album was that never came out, it was very clear to me that on the road, getting to know Eric and Tim, that they were both very strong singer-songwriters in their own right. And I had this fantasy of having like this, double record set, almost like Sloan or somebody, where like there was just almost too much material, and it was all just fantastic different styles and stews of pop fare, with 60s and 70s and 80s overtones, and everybody was singing a lead vocal and everybody was harmonizing on each other's thing, and yet there was just still going to be this Jellyfish umbrella sound. And of course that never happened. So I just wanted to write with Tim again. So I asked him if he wanted to try some long distance writing, and he said that'd be great. He might even come out to LA. And then he got back to me with, hey, why don't we invite Eric to join us as well? And I was like, fine, that's a wonderful idea. Eric and I hadn't worked together since Imperial Drag. I said, let's do it. And so we all got together just to write and to share ideas. And that went.
Did you guys bring, just excuse me just a second, I'm
Yeah.
sorry to inject there. Did you, when you started that process of saying, hey, yeah, let's do this, did each of you bring ideas or snippets of songs individually and then bring it to the collective and, you know, massage and wrestle it to the mat a bit? What did that look like,
Yeah.
that process?
No, that's the whole idea. I had made solo albums. I didn't want, this was intentionally not a solo record. Obviously, I was inviting other people into it. I wanted to see what happened when we collaborated, when our personalities had a chance to come out of hiding, so to speak, and merge in an unedited kind of way. So I brought a lot of unfinished ideas, as did the guys. And that typically means, oh, here's something I want to play for you. It sounds like a chorus to me. It sounds like a big sing-along chorus. If you are inspired by it, let's try to write a verse around it. Let's try to write a bridge. Let's try to complete the thought. And that included if anyone had a loose lyrical concept. So we did that we had two 2-week sessions of that, beginning of 2017. Tim flew out, and that yielded about 20 ideas we felt good about. And then we, reduced that down to 12 that were the strongest contenders, if you will. And then we're like, well, that was fun. Should we record it? And
next box to open.
Yeah, which was going to be a whole other endeavor with no money and no practical. It's one thing for me to do a solo record and just sit in front of my computer and sculpt and do what needs to be done by myself. But to integrate as a trio with one of your band members living in Atlanta, we had told Jeremy Stacy about the project, and he said, if you ever record, I want a drum. I'm like, Jeremy, you live in England and we can't afford you anyway. He goes, we'll make it happen. So we called him up on it and say, hey, we're ready to do this. Are you available? Are you interested? Are you free? Are you affordable? And
how did that look? How did that financial component, not only, being able to pay Jeremy something, because obviously he commands probably more than what you were eventually able to present to him, but just the recording process as well. I mean, how did you overcome that obstacle?
Well, we were very fortunate in that there was a gentleman who I had been doing recording with on his project, and he knows who he is. I don't know if I have any business announcing his name all over the world, but he has executive producer credit on the record.
There you go.
There you go.
You can find out what's up.
Yeah, for the very reason that he and I already had a great business relationship. Basically, he would hire me to play and sing and work with him on his solo stuff. And when I mentioned off the cuff that Tim and Eric and I were working together, he was so excited. He goes, you mean part of Jellyfish is getting together? I go, well, I guess you could look at it that way, yeah. He goes, I want to be involved. I go, what the hell does that mean? We're a three-piece. He goes, no. I want to see what it's like to record with you guys from the ground up. What does it look like to have these songs?
Very cool.
You told me you just have them in the demo stage. You've been writing at Eric's house just on acoustic guitar and piano. What's it like to see that all the way to the end? So he basically, purchased an elaborate fan experience, if you will.
Yeah.
And his contributions helped the band fund, so to speak, and we all dipped into our own pockets as well. But yeah, we couldn't have had the luxury of recording real drums in a decent studio with a fantastic engineer who's now mixing it too, Ken Sluter, to give it that large 3D aspect that the album and songs called for, without this gentleman's assistance. And it was actually, and again, this is a unique situation. You can't, it's one thing to have somebody say, okay, my checkbook's out, but he's such a personable guy. I already had a healthy relationship with him, both as a person and as a businessman. from the years of other work that we'd done. So I knew that, you know, he was trustworthy to move forward with, and that he really believed in what we were doing. He wanted to support music like this. So it was a very unique and special situation that, you know, we're eternally grateful for. But that was really the springboard for launching the basics of this record.
Yeah, what a blessing to have him in all of your lives. And I would imagine he must have received some wonderful fruit, being able to sort of be a kind of a fly on the wall, so to speak, inside that process. So
he would fly out to LA. Yeah, he'd fly out to LA and he'd sit in on a lot of the recording sessions. I mean, our girlfriends weren't even at recording sessions, you know. It was basically us, the engineer, Jeremy, and our benefactor.
How long did it take for Jeremy to lay down his drum parts for the core songs that you had, but probably some other parts?
I think we did 2 songs a day. So he was out in LA for a week.
Fantastic.
And that was just drums. All the other instruments came in after the fact. Occasionally we would jam with him, but that was usually replaced later. We didn't have the luxury of, let's write a bunch of songs, try them out on the road for a year, come back to the studio. You know, that's the old traditional model, which there's a lot to be said for. This was a studio record built from the ground up with lots and lots of experimentation.
I've talked with other artists who have done projects in a very similar fashion inside the arc that you're talking about here, and I've heard it's said that when they brought the drummer in to lay down the tracks onto tape, that took the project up to another level. It became more real. It became more a new level of excitement. Was received an energy that started to permeate the rest of the process that still lay ahead, and just such a key part. And it's drummers are so often overlooked in that manner, especially when they can be programmed so easily, much to the detriment of the music.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Jeremy spent 4 or 5 days prior to going in the studio. We just taught him all the material, so he could sit there and, you know, because again, any great session musician, in my opinion, I don't see otherwise. And this goes for a lot of great producers too. They've got to understand songwriting. You know, the drummer or session bass player, session guitarist, whatever, you've got to understand, okay, I have the technique and experience that I can play pretty much whatever I want on my instrument. I may have my specialties or whatever, but I'm essentially an arranger. I'm bringing to the song an aspect of that's going to make or break it in a lot of ways. You know, what's the role of the drummer in the song? What's the role of the bass player? And to know how to best serve the tune and what is the artist trying to get across. So, you know, Jeremy's written and recorded original music. He's worked with some of the best songwriters in the history of popular music in the last several decades. And so it was great to just have his wisdom in that room with us and show him our little idea, and goes, oh, you know, I really understand what you want to do in that chorus, and it's got to explode. So, and then I might say something like, yeah, but you got to make sure you build it out of the verse into the chorus, however you want to do that. It can't just go cold. And, you know, it's just all that history and experience coming together. And there's not that many people walking the planet who, one, understand that anymore, but value it. Because popular songwriting is, you know, couldn't be more different than what, say, Carole King was doing, you know, 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah, 40, 50 years ago.
Yeah.
Sorry to date us there, Roger.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you talking about Jeremy and his work, and it just sort of reminds me of one of my kind of personal obsessions. I played drums in a really good high school band back in 1979 to 81, I guess it was, but I'm not a drummer anymore. And that was a long, long time ago. But I've been always obsessed with like Jeff Porcaro, for example, of Toto. I collect albums of all the studio sessions of Steve Lukather.
That's a large collection.
And what's that?
That's got to be a large collection.
It is a large
He
collection.
played on so much stuff, even though he
Yeah.
passed away so early.
Yeah, but Porcaro and Lukather, whose biography, by the way, is a must-read if you haven't read it.
I have not.
The Gospel According to Luke. It's awesome. But Porcaro brought that special kind of exact nature of his talents that you were just discussing just now into every session that he did, I've noticed. So he could take really pedestrian material, you know, that a lot of singer-songwriter artists of that time that got contracts, one and dones. But when a Lukather or a Porcaro came onto those sessions, they took this rather average pedestrian material and lifted it up because they understood what they could bring and really propel it as much as you could forward and into a higher level.
Well, you're absolutely right. As young as they were raised in a musical family, and their father was immersed in, you know, quality post-jazz era record making, and so they bring, even in their youth, a great level of sophistication to an otherwise very straightforward singer-songwriter tune, you know.
Yeah,
And,
well, in Toto, you had also, you know, David Paik with his dad, Marty Paik, and then like with Beck, his father. I mean, and I would imagine when you in the work that you've done with Beck, and he's sort of legendary with how meticulous and professional he is. I would imagine he got a lot of that from his father in terms of construction and orchestration of Beck's unique creative vision from that DNA as well. And I imagine you've experienced that firsthand.
absolutely. But the thing that's so great about working with Beck, say, versus, you know, a Toto era musician, that generation, is that although punk rock happened during Toto, punk rock aesthetic didn't really work its way into regular popular music till, God, even the 90s maybe, when our generation was, you know, getting signed by record companies and all that stuff. So just because you can do something sophisticated and it's valued by a generation of pop creators, it doesn't mean it's valued by the next generation or the generation after that, or that the song even necessarily requires it. And so it's a crazy damn, and someone like Beck understands that. He's literally got one foot in, he has the ability, whether it's, you know, being around his father for the time in his life that he has or not, he has the ability to appreciate and dissect sophisticated post-jazz influenced, hyper arranged music, popular music, and then also appreciate all of the deconstruction postmodern aspects of punk rock and how that, or even early hip hop, and how that in the DJ culture. There's very few people who have an in-depth understanding of all those genres of popular music in the last 50 years, and then can cherry pick and decorate their own music with it. You know, what I always joke, if I'm listening to Toto or Steely Dan or any of those 70s, you know, Doobie Brothers, any of those hyper produced yacht rock experiences, the craftsman in me can sit for hours and revel, but after about 3 or 4 songs, I got to go listen to some Dead Kennedys or Sex Pistols or Damned or some you know, some punk pop that like kind of tears it all down and flies in the face of that, because I like both those worlds and everything in between. And you can get lost in the extremes, is all I'm saying. Certainly for my generation, man, there's people in the generation before me who will never understand punk rock. They'll never understand the point of it. They'll think it's just noise, you know, much like I might have criticisms about contemporary pop for the 20-somethings of now. It's what do your musical values draw you to? And often a person can't even articulate it. It's just subjective. You know, we were forced the sounds, whether we like it or not, we were forced the sounds of the Fifth Dimension and Jimmy Webb and Burt Bacharach and I don't know, the Monkees as little kids, right? That stuff's just bombarding us. And it was all new and exciting to us because we'd never heard music before. And so we had there are things we were drawn to over others. So by the time we are in high school, like you said, hey man, that punk rock stuff with the spikes and the red hair and the paper clips in my face, I don't know what's going on there. Or the first time we hear hip hop, well, what does this have to do with the Beatles? You know, everybody's response and reaction was different. Somebody who's still listening to Sabbath is not going to necessarily be on board with Run DMC or something, nor do they have to be, or reggae. Yeah. But I've always enjoyed, you know, taking the best of all those worlds and throwing it into my music. Obviously, my songwriting very much sits in a tradition of 60s, 70s, even some 80s pop stylings. But that's always going to be high melodic content on harmonically rich music with some kind of groove feel that's based in a rock backbeat.
Well, it's interesting because I'm somewhat cheating here because I've known, because we've talked about this before, about how first off, I'm very similar to you. I mean, I live in that world. I mean, I was weaned at a very 72. You know, I discovered Iggy Pop, the Dolls right afterwards, the MC5, but I was listening to funk and soul, and oh man, when the MC5 got back together and did that tour, they came to Fort Collins, Colorado, where I live, you know, an hour north. And a few of our best music buddies, you know, it was sparsely attended, but man,
oh right,
we opened up and bled for them, man, up at the front of the stage. You know, sure, Rob Tyner wasn't there, but screw it, man, it was awesome.
They're one of America's greatest rock bands.
Oh man, the video of those guys live, can you believe that?
It's absolutely insane. I was always a Stooges fan, and then I just saw the Iggy documentary. The Stooges documentary. The Jim Jarmusch.
There's been a whole bunch. What, is this a new one?
The Jim Jarmusch just did, like in the last 2 years, I think.
Oh yes, okay, I know. Yeah.
And that was just like, I already liked them enough, and then I was reminded again, it's like, oh my God, how, you know, thank God.
I mean, think about how beautiful and beautifully poetic it is that Iggy Pop is a millionaire.
Yeah.
I fucking love that.
Amen.
I mean, it's just, who would have guessed when we were kids, you know, in the 70s and early 80s, listening to those records, that one would ever still be alive, and still making really good music as well, and being a real artist, and working up and collaborating with different types of musicians, and approaching album projects with completely different aesthetics. Yeah. You know, without regard for commercial digestion. It's just fascinating. But I know that what I was going to say was, I know I'm sort of cheating because I know a lot of your passions and how you approach things creatively are informed by jazz. And if you don't mind, talk about that a little bit, because I think it's really fascinating, because your kind of backgrounds and interests in a deep part of jazz history, and how they have worked to make you the artist that you are.
Absolutely. So in high school, I was introduced to fusion rock and jazz, of which in the 70s and early 80s, there was still plenty of brilliant. That's another favorite time of mine in music, where
mine too.
Super young jazz kids of the 60s and 70s, like John McLaughlin and Jan Hammer and Herbie Hancock, and there's so many of them. But they had all grown up with the Hendrix Trio, amongst others as well. So suddenly jazz just basically gets lit on fire. And amplification and electronics are coming into all forms of music at 1,000 miles an hour in the 70s. So fusion was a very easy backdoor into the history of jazz for me. So the more I
It was the same for me too.
yeah,
Fusion literally opened up the whole world going backwards.
exactly. And what a world it was, obviously, because there were, 3 or 4 decades of jazz before the 70s even hit. And so as a young pianist in high school, I became obsessed with what could be done with the keyboard, and just kept understanding it kept going back and back and back to the forefathers. And so 2 things happened. I got introduced to much more complex chromatic harmony, and how rich harmony could be, because I was only trained classically.
So you could always read music.
Yeah, so I could
Right, right.
I had traditional classical piano lessons, so reading was not a problem. I took it for granted. But I started to understand and be really attracted to jazz harmony, which was very advanced. The rhythm was very advanced, and all these things just develop these parts of your musical psyche.
Were there any particular artists that were emblematic of what you just said?
All the standard classic greats, right? So anybody who graduated through the Miles School, and a huge Bill Evans fan, Chick and Herbie, and love McCoy Tyner. But it was also about the songwriting. And so in the 30s, 40s, 50s, you just played the standards, right? So all the classics from musicals and the hit parade of that era, of those eras. And so suddenly I'm hearing really sophisticated pop songs, right? So the songs that Frank Sinatra, for example, took to #1 are highly complex melodically and harmonically. And it's the same vocabulary that a little Paul McCartney's learning when he's, talking about studying music hall, which is what it was called in England, I guess. That music is harmonically rich, whereas, his buddy John Lennon, he's not really studying that. He's studying more of the Little Richards and Jerry Lee Lewis and Buddy Hollies and stuff. But that's the only way McCartney can show up at the Beatles jam session with, "Hey, I just wrote this new song called Yesterday," is because he has that study. And the art of that is when you write a song like that, and Brian Wilson did the same thing, is it doesn't sound sophisticated to the listener. You're just following the melody and singing along. You don't care whether it's 3 chords making that up or 28 chords making it up, or if there's these dense chord intervals and extensions and chromatic harmony happening, or you don't care about that. It's either gratifying to you or it's not. But that's the brilliance of like a Beach Boys moment in time. They're, again, equal parts Chuck Berry, equal parts jazz. 4 freshmen, all of the great classic songwriters of the 30s, 40s, 50s that Murray played in the house. And then the young kids get exposed to Chuck Berry and all the rock and rollers, and those worlds get fused. Well, except when Brian isn't feeling like he wants to write a dance fun hit with Mike Love and the guys. He's feeling moody and introspective, and he writes Warmth of the Sun. And it's like, wait a minute. You don't just take that for granted. And see, that's what a lot of people assume. I'm going to learn my 5 rock chords and be on my merry way, which many people have written some brilliant literature with just their 5 or 6 rock chords. My point is that if one wants, there's a whole world of vocabulary that you can bring to your songwriting. And so as a little kid, I was inspired by, Don't Worry Baby and Help Me Rhonda and Fun and all that stuff, as much as I was the super moody stuff. Like, why does my stomach feel so weird? How is this happening? And
then throw that in with all the other stuff, with funk and late 60s, early mid 70s soul,
right.
punk as well. We both are big Damn fans, I know.
It's so rich.
I have my visceral memories of just where the world changed in that period of when I was 13, 14 years old in late 77, early 77 with the first Ramones record and the first Damned record. I mean, those records sonically spoke to the core of my soul, but the next moment after, playing New Rose for the 10th time in a row, I was shifting into my latest discovery of Mahavishnu New Orchestra, or listening to, a Marvin Gaye record that I noticed in the used bins at the same time. This stuff was all bashing around equally. And the love and passion distributed to it all. It just always made sense to me that way.
So whether you're talking about a kind of golden era of funk and Motown and R&B writing, or pop that is highly arranged and orchestrated, such as Earth, Wind and Fire, Steely Dan, there's many more, even like 10cc, even the band XTC. I mean, Andy Partridge was a jazzer. I don't know to what degree he studied it, but he has the ear. His ear is sophisticated enough. So all jazz did for me, because I got very immersed in it for a while, I never forgot about everything else. But, imagine I'm listening to lots of Herbie Hancock and Fusion and Mahavishnu while I'm listening to a lot of early Genesis and the new Police record or the new Peter Gabriel. Those are all happening at the same time. And the same ingredients are hitting me on all those recordings. That's high, rich, singable, melodic content. That's earworms, just stacks of earworms. You just can't, these melodies are so rich. Hyper arranged, premeditative, conceptual, thought out pop, both rhythmically and harmonically advanced, but not in a showy. I mean, you could maybe say some of the progressive rock stuff was, but not. They're not flaunting it for the sake of flaunting it, unless that's the point of the music. And if the point is we want very fast passages like Alan Holdsworth the whole time, well, that's what they're going to do. But at the end of the day, it was always songwriting first. So Sting, who led most of the writing of the Police, another jazzer.
Well, and Andy Summers, very much a jazzer.
Absolutely, absolutely. So you've got these three guys who basically they're musical.
Oh, Copeland too. What are we talking about? They were all jazzers.
Yeah. So their level of sophistication is huge. But as far as what they wanted to share with the world in terms of songwriting and the pop art they were going to put forth, it was almost beneath them. It was very dumbed down because that was their goal. Can we write catchy, simple hooks with a punk edge, but just enough like hyper, little Beatley musical twists that we can have our Police sound versus what the Clash are doing versus what Pistols or Damned are doing. What's our version of it? And they called forth a lot of their musicality from studying jazz and other more elaborate, sophisticated pop forms, and merging it into their Police sound. That's all me and my friends ever wanted to do. When I met Andy Sturmer, he was obsessed with Simon Phillips, Missing Persons, Frank Zappa, and the Police, and and Tears for Fears, and we bonded on all that stuff. And he turned me on to so much of that music I didn't even know about because I was just listening to Yes and Genesis or something, And
see, Simon Phillips, another drummer that highly informed everything that he played on. Just a ridiculously sophisticated drummer.
Yeah. So this is the long way to answer your question of how does jazz play a role. Jazz allows me to go, I'm hearing a harmony situation happening. It's floating somewhere between the Carpenters, Fleetwood Mac, and the Beach Boys, but with some kind of Queen element. Well, I can dissect anything very, very fast and then go, well, what's my/our version of that? And if you're getting hung up on the theory, you're going to get slowed down or you're not going to be able to do it at all. Yeah. I can kind of spit it out and then we can all take a vote. Is that too fancy? Is it not fancy enough? Is it getting us what we want? Is it conveying? And it's just the art of arranging. And thankfully, I've had enough training and I'm fascinated by enough styles of yesteryear that I feel like I've always got this endless storehouse of options, that I'm not limited by this one box, that I'm really good at this one box, but that's the extent of my offerings. So that's what assists me as a sideman. And that's what's assisted me as a collaborator in working with these other brilliant artists I have for our own bands. Thanks to my mom and dad for putting up with me banging on the drums upstairs, paying for music lessons, and ultimately music school. And, you know, I mean, you got something to fall back on, son? That might be a good idea, but they never discouraged me. They never said, you know, making it in music is next to impossible. They're like, if you're going to go for it, go for it.
Yeah.
And I'm still figuring out how to make it in music, but it's everybody's journey is different.
Well, it's interesting listening to you talk at length about this, and an analogy just sort of occurred to me, and I don't know if it's a good one or applicable or not, but with this can be for a fan too, but in the context of artistry, is that all these kinds of influences that we grow up with, and especially open-minded music fans that embrace all these different aesthetics, compositionally and musically, from the rich music past that we were able to enjoy, they all sort of pour into our unique foundation. You know, they become the cement that we just sort of who we are as a music fan or as a musician. And from there, you have different sort of girded steel that erects from there. And then what gets built up around it inside the creative projects are the different rooms of your life, with the different projects that you work in, whether it's bands, whether collaboratively or solo projects. These becomes the rooms that you explore, but it's all comes back to the foundation that's kind of beyond our control. You know, it's just what we have, the influences that we encounter in the environment of our homes and people that turn us on to different things. But they can't be changed because the concrete's poured. It's who we are, right?
Yeah. Well, they can be changed if one is like any aspect.
You blow up the concrete and start all over again.
Yeah, you have to have a willingness to explore possibilities, leave comfort zones. You know, oh, I know how to do this on my guitar, and I can do this in my sleep. I know these chord voicings in my sleep. What do you mean you're telling me that there's these 12 others I haven't even explored yet in my songwriting? Yeah.
And thus the new room extension is built.
Exactly.
You know,
exactly.
From that. Yeah, well, it's interesting. You mentioned one of my favorites. And I got a book recommendation for you. It came out in December because I'm obsessed with this band.
That's as recent as December?
Yeah, just came out in December. And the great thing about this book, it's 10cc, the worst band in the world, for those that couldn't read that on the video there, is that, look at the size of this. This is like a love letter to the band from a fan. And everybody participated that was ever in the group. It deeply researched. The guy's not a writer. He just felt compelled to do this project, worked on it for years, self-published it, did a brilliant job. It's a beautiful cover and hard cover and beautifully laid out with the graphic design. But how big of a fan you are, I mean, I would highly recommend it, because you really, it's written by a fan for fans, with the full collaboration of the artists as well.
Great to know.
Yeah, so it's a great project there.
Thank you.
So 10cc, but so we were talking about Licorice Quartet, and kind of went down a rabbit hole there. But I encourage anybody listening to this right now, if you have not checked out the Licorice Quartet with the 4 songs that are available, and maybe by the time you're watching this down the line, there's a lot more of the body of work that has been born into the world. If you're a Jellyfish fan and a fan of Roger or Eric or Tim's work, it really, the 4 songs that the public have heard couldn't be more emblematic of the 4. Boy, I thought I had turned my phone off there. My apologies here. What a pro I am, huh? Dear Lord, I turned it down. I'm now joined the iPhone world, and I'm still mastering this stuff. But it really, you can hear all three of you very distinctively, and it's such a, each song is absolutely wonderful, and all of your DNA and all your talents are there. I want to say equally distributed, um, but it's exactly as you described it. So I really, really look forward to hearing what the next step and the next phase of this project is going to be as well. So I have a few questions, most of which are covered from a good friend of mine, Jeff LaQuatra, who's a professor of classical guitar at Colorado State University here. I met him, by the way, funny story real quick. We have 25 microbreweries here in Fort Collins.
Yes, you do.
I was out with a friend and we noticed a guy in the corner there with a Jellyfish shirt on, which in Fort Collins is a little bit unusual, but you know the gig. You see this and experience this all the time. So of course we get up and go over and talk to him, and he finds out that I'm the guy that had Not Lame Recordings and did the Jellyfish fan club box set project, and he proceeded to just really freak out and was overwhelmed, which is always kind of a unique experience from the label side. It does happen, but anyway, we become fast friends, and he's a brilliant musician. But he's like a pantheist. He does it all. But I got a couple questions, if you don't mind me, that he asked me, and we've covered some of this stuff. So I'm going to read, if you don't mind.
Yeah, just so you know, I've got less than 15 minutes.
Yeah, no, and
Sorry.
well, I think we did a good job, I think, getting granular here.
Absolutely.
All said and done.
But ask away.
Yeah. Okay. This is what he said. Of the many things I enjoy so much about your music is that you have an uncanny way of paying homage to so many musical influences, yet you retain a very individual and original voice. Can you talk a bit about, were you inspired by any of the following? We talked about jazz, classical composers, film composers, and arrangers, and then what are some of your non-music inspirations in pulp culture, literature, and film?
Good question. So inspired classically? No. I would say that most of the classical literature that I've been exposed to, there's very, very little, few and far between, that I go, wow, that's an interesting piece of music. I'm moved by it. A lot of the obvious romantic era composers, I guess Chopin and Schubert, I guess late 1800s. I like Debussy quite a bit, but I'm no expert. There's
Stravinsky was a punk.
What's that?
Stravinsky was a punk.
Certainly, and there's classical composers. Again, kind of starting mid 1800s up to the early part of the 1900s. There's these moments where I'm like, wow, that's just so fascinating. But I then don't have an urge to go out and do that. I'm not inspired in any way to sit down and play it, to learn how to compose that way. It does not resonate with me ultimately. Now, I love the fugue, interplay, and harmonic explorations of Bach in a more traditional, Baroque stuff. But again, it starts becoming almost computer music after a while because there's so much sequencing. It's really what happens for me is when jazz happens. So when jazz infiltrates in the early 1900s and then starts going through all of its incarnations. So one of my favorite, I guess, contemporary classical composers is Gershwin, who's hyper influenced by jazz harmony. So it's all about when chromaticism starts happening. And I'm sure many classical composers explored that prior to jazz, but I like the lyricism, the melodic content, the harmonic richness that happens when jazz enters into popular culture music. So as far as film composers go, not really. I'm a huge Mark Isham fan, but more about Mark Isham as a jazzer and all of his pre-scoring projects. I've heard various scores of his, and of course there's moments where I go, oh, that's straight up Isham, you know, and his vocabulary of things. But so much film scoring, certainly of the last 30 years, has been you have to fill a role. There's very few guys going, I'm going to say something original, and lo and behold, it supports the picture at the same time. Scoring is you are a good scorer if you have enhanced what's being seen. It's not about you. It's not about listening to this wonderful melody I've created.
That's really interesting. I never thought of it that way.
Which is one of the reasons I don't do it.
Perfect sense.
Yeah, I love playing on people's scores. I have composer friends who hire me. I love that process. I love being part of their little team of getting the music out there. I have no interest in doing score myself. There have been classic moments in film history when, again, the Romantics, you know, Michel Legrand and Marvin Hamlish, and these people were scoring films and they had to come up with a theme. That's when scoring was more thematic based. You know, I need a theme for the damsel in distress. I need a theme for the villain. I need a theme for the hero, on and on and on. Then you've got these classic melody shapes like Leonard Bernstein and West Side Story and that kind of stuff, more like the musical tradition.
Yeah, Rodgers and Hammerstein.
Yeah, a lot of that stuff I enjoy.
Sondheim.
Yeah, Sondheim, straight up. These are people who I absolutely admire. I've loved exploring the classic literature they've contributed. It's made its way into the pop fare. Again, a lot of it exists because of jazz tradition. They're not borrowing from classical tradition as much as they are jazz tradition. So that's the answer to that. As far as
what about pop culture, literature, film and television?
Gosh, I love really clever comedy writing. So whether you're talking about Monty Python or Chris Elliott or Larry David or Woody Allen or I mean, there's a ton I'm forgetting.
Have you seen Schitt's Creek?
I have. I'm not that big a fan.
Yeah.
Everybody I know.
Our family, early COVID lockdown, all our college age kids were home with us, and that was sort of our family.
My whole family.
It took me a while to get into the groove of it. Once I did, the girl who plays the daughter, she's a comedic genius. Unbelievable timing. And she was days away from quitting her acting career, is her story.
I didn't know that. Yeah.
She got the call.
Yeah. You know, for me, I'm so serious and focused in all these other parts of my life that leisure time begs me to have some levity. And so I actually crave quality comedy like a junkie almost.
So who's doing it for you right now? And then we'll sort of tie this up and
the same people who've been doing it for the last 30 years, South Park. Matt and Trey are
oh man.
That's you're in my psyche when you're watching that show.
Yeah. I just love the fact that, you know, it's such courageous art too, in these politically correct days that have become so tyrannous for comedy.
Absolutely.
Political correctness is profoundly disturbing for me because South Park exists so boldly and strongly because nothing is sacred. It's just comedy, you know, and it informs our culture. It makes commentary and it evokes thought and ponderance by us and challenges us to say, hey, I never actually thought about it that way. You know, why do I believe this? I mean, and they're the ones that are triggering, you know, these kinds of new understandings.
And so ultimately, not only do you have a good laugh, but it's intellectually stimulating. Sure. It's philosophically inspiring. It opens up conversation. It challenges convention, and through laughter, you're allowed to question stuff that you've maybe held as truth or belief or were handed down from whatever authority figure in your life. So it's a beautiful, beautiful. I mean, the other brilliant person who's done that for years now is Mike Judge. Everything he's done, it's just like, oh my God, please don't ever die. Please just keep doing what you're doing. You know, his most recent stuff, Tales from the Tour Bus. I don't know if you were able to see any of those episodes.
No,
They're,
I haven't.
those are must sees. There's a
I am taking due note.
Yeah, season 1 is all about the greats of classic 60s, 70s country music. Season 2, which I don't know if they've even completed it, was all about the greats of the classic funk R&B era. So it's a combination
That's
of
in my wheelhouse too.
interviews with some of these legends, but then animated and put together in a docu-comedy style.
Yeah, I've seen it. I've seen a few of those. Well, anyway, we'll finish up here because you got to get going. And thanks so much for sitting down with all of us here, actually. But just so we make sure we don't overlook this, give us the best way to check out what you're doing with your solo work, the Licorice Quartet. Again, say how, for the musicians that would like to work with you in some sort of collaborative manner, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
So the best way, I finally have a solo music portal, and that's just Roger Joseph Manning Jr. official.com.
You weren't official enough with that name?
It's a long story, but somebody hijacked my name for some weird reason on the web. And
if you're out there, whoever it is, douche.
And then, of course, licoricequartet.com is another way to see what we're up to. And, we're still right in the middle. I mean, we're going to be. These are ongoing. We give the big kind of push when the album is physically available. But all the experiences and merch and fan engagement, everything from a quick phone interview if you want to invite us to do that with you, or like I said, playing on your record, or there's so many. We're having a lot of fun with those. Call up and leave an original answering machine for you on your phone, message, blah blah blah. That's licoricequartet.com. rogerarranging.com is another place to go directly to reach out to me for any projects you have in the works that you might want my involvement with. And that's really the main portals. And then, of course, the Facebook pages for Licorice Quartet, me, Roger Joseph Manning Jr. I always use my full name. There's both the band artist page and then the fan page, but I'm maxed out on friends on the friend page, so I can only invite you through the band page, the artist page. And then, I'm on Instagram too, but I just don't participate.
There's only so much bandwidth to go around.
Well, social media is a full-time job, and as I tell most of my friends, who say, "Where are you? How come I can't find you?" I go, "Look, before social media, I wasn't that social." Of course, I went out to dinner with my friends. Of course, I went to parties, but I'm in the study here, trying to paint my latest and greatest picture for you all.
And you need to work on your book, your keyboard book too.
Well, there's sure. I got to get a book out like Luke.
Yeah, exactly. The Gospel According to Sir Roger of Joseph Manning Jr.
Yeah.
Well, since we began with that, we'll end with that and bookend it perfectly. Such a pleasure again. Thank you so much for your time. We'll do it again when the next Licorice Quartet project comes about.
Yes.
Hopefully before you come through town here in Denver with Beck again, and we'll hook up then.
Great, Bruce.
In the meantime, Godspeed, stay safe out there, and just keep doing what you're doing, and keep the joy of music in your heart, which I know you do because you protect that so very well.
I do. I appreciate that. And let me say to all the fans who are listening now, give you a in public thank you, personal thank you for all of your support over the years with all these crazy adventures I've taken by myself and with my collaborators, my friends. You've been a very serious base and portal for all things relevant to the music and genres that we create in. So thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. And thank you for this interview podcast situation. It's going to be great for people to catch up with, more current activity.
Awesome. We'll do it again soon. Godspeed, everyone.